Hello, you guys. My name is Najwa. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, please join our little community. Hit the subscribe button, hit the bell so you know whenever I post a video. I just wanted to quickly talk about what happened with Russell Brand, the allegations that have come out. I just wanted to provide my 2 cents because I feel like what happened to him is unfortunate. I know recently he has become sort of a social media personality and he's garnered a very large following. And I think that following will follow him into whatever sort of sticky situation he gets in. Unfortunately, that is kind of just like the culture that we have today. It's just people will follow you to a fault. I don't know if it's because there is a deeper sense of insecurity that is happening in society right now where people are really looking for a leader, for lack of better terms. There have been these figures who, and before I really get into the politics of it all, let me just say that no one is all good or all bad. People are all good, all bad, wrapped all up together, People good people can do bad people can do good things, and I think we have just gotten into this how do I want to say, we've gotten into this sort of sticky situation where we just want to simplify everything down to a sound bite. We want people to either be good or bad. We want to stock them away in that category in our mind and be done with it. But life is not so black and white as that. Things are very nuanced. And if you look at the culture wars, if you look at the divisive things that are happening with very far right dissenting voices, very far left dissenting voices, that's where you run into a problem, is when you stop trying to understand all the nuances of life. It's cognitive dissonance, that's what maturity and emotional intelligence and intellectual intelligence forces you to do it as you grow as a human being, is to look at things and understand all the shades of gray in between black and white. So with that being said, I used to really like Russell Brand. Like, one of my first sort of, I guess you would say, adult movies that I ever saw was Forgetting Sarah Marshall. I watched it with my parents and my sisters and brothers, and we laughed so hard about it. I think I was probably a teenager at that point. I remember his role from that movie. I remember laughing so hard at that movie. I remember his relationship with Katy Perry, millennial here, you guys know. So I grew up in that time. And, I just think I watched this special from Novara Media about the whole situation with Russell Brand. I really recommend you watch it and watch everything that they put out because they are beasts in it. They were talking about how Russell Brand is sort of a product of the early 2000s, the early 2010s, where, it was just like that was what they did. And it was passable. It was passable to be misogynistic. It was passable to be what we used to call the F-boy, you know what I'm talking about? It was passable to just sort of, for guys, young or old guys during this time, to be very forceful in their sexuality towards women, to use it as a punchline, as the brunt of the joke. And for women, it was very normalized for them to just sit there and take it. And that was the times, it just shows that we learn and we grow as society, we develop. But if you really think back, that was the times. I know sometimes I go back and I watch some of my favorite shows from that time period, and I just realized how sexualized girls were back then. It doesn't really surprise me at this point where women in society, especially women of color, are often forced to be extremely sexualized, and that's the only way that they can penetrate into famedom, into success, into power, as if they go extremely sexualized. If they don't have, like, that Kamala Harris, Condoleezza Rice, who's another person like it, Kerry Washington, if they don't have that type of like really sharp intellectual wit, they basically have to go really sexualized. And that's just not black women. I mean, think about how, one of my favorite shows growing up was, what's it called? The one with Hilary Duff on Disney Channel. Even when I go back and look at that, I'm like, oh my God, look at what she's wearing, you know? Back then it seemed wholesome, but now that I look at it and you look at it compare it up against the time gone by, you realize that the culture that came out of the early 2000s and the early 2010s sexualized boys and girls and young men and women, young men and young women in a way that was, you know, basically a setup for failure. You know, it's what brought the Me Too movement. And I basically say all that to say that I don't think that Russell Brand is an evil person. I don't. I think he is someone who had a screwed up childhood, and this is the product of a combination of a bunch of different things. It's a screwed up childhood. It's the society that we live in today. It's the toxic culture of social media where people on social media will basically keep pushing you to destroy yourself for their own entertainment. It is the symptoms of living in a patriarchal, racist, xenophobic society for a very long time. Not that he's been racist or xenophobic, but, you know, I'm just kind of putting it into context for you. When you think of all of these elements, you realize how you get these issues. Like the guy from the 70s show. It was a culture that really was appropriated back then. I watched the movie RV, for example, with JoJo. You guys remember JoJo? I mean, I'm seriously giving away my millennial roots at this point right now. But I even looked at the way that movie had no black people in it. You know, even on a side note, taking like allegations out of it. But just think about the early 2000s, 2010s. Like, I saw one black person in that movie, and I love Robin Williams. Like, me and my sisters and brothers had that movie Mrs. Doubtfire on VHS, and we used to watch it all the time, you know? But then I go back and I look at some of these movies from the late 90s and the early 2000s, and there's no black people, none at all, you know? And it was seen as very family-friendly, wholesome type material back then. It's not until now that we've advanced a little bit that we can go back and look at stuff from the early 2000s, early 2010s and be like, oh yeah, that was toxic AF. Oh, that joke was inappropriate. Yeah, that was pretty much misogynistic, racist. And I'm not the type of person who wants to be like dog whistling the politically incorrect stuff all the time. You know, even me, sometimes I'm just like, oh my God, why do I have to do this? But think about Real Housewives of Orange County. There is this one episode, I was literally watching some of the throwbacks, you know, the other day. And Vicki Gunvalson's, no, it wasn't Vicki Gunvalson. It was Gina. It was her son, Colton, I think. He said, don't be gay. He said that to his sister. They are like high schoolers at this point. This would have been, I guess, around 2005, 2006, something like that. He was like, don't be gay. And do you guys remember that? There was a time, I am guilty of that. I remember sometime back in like the early 2000s where like, don't be gay was a saying. And behind that saying was don't be stupid, you know? So I guess that's all just to put into the point that to a certain extent, anybody who's not of the alpha generation or very young Gen Z generation lived through where being sexist, being misogynistic, appropriating culture, making allowances for culture that objectifies and sexualizes and even abuses women was to a certain extent acceptable. It's disgusting, and I hate to talk about that, but it was. And so I think ultimately what I'm trying to say is when we look at Russell Brand, you know, he had a really rough childhood, and he was abused. Men don't often like to talk about their feelings. You know, I don't want to come from a place of stereotypes or whatever, and I am a little bit of a different specimen because politically I fall, I would say I'm a left centrist. And the reason I say that, I usually don't even like to label myself as a Democrat, you know, because I hate labels, you know, like I'm voting Democrat in 2024, you know, and every time that I voted, it's been Democrat. But, you know, I grew up in the South, you know, I grew up in the South, and those reinforced gender roles, I guess are hammered into my head. But when I look out into society, it makes sense to me. Do I support LGBTQ plus rights? Yes, you better freaking bet that I do. But I do think that there is a nature to men and women. You know what? I'm gonna take that out. I'm gonna take that out. I think that there is a nature to feminine and masculine, because I do think that some men and some women can feel as if they were born in the wrong body. I do feel like some people, who are born biologically as a male can be very effeminate. You see them. You see them in your families and you see them in your friend groups. Sometimes it doesn't have to do with the way they were raised. They could have been raised, as a boy who played with trucks, who their parents dressed them in blue, but they could be very effeminate. It just happens sometimes, and vice versa with women. So I'm going to say I do think there is a nature to masculine and feminine. And for me, this is my opinion. It's like a booty hole, like my grandma said, like my mama said, it's like a booty hole. Everybody's got one. But for me, I do think that there is an inherent energy, a yin and a yang to men and women. And historically, men have not liked to talk about their feelings. I want to argue it is what is going on at a higher level in society right now. And they might talk a whole lot. I mean, Russell Brand has a podcast where he talks a whole lot. But is he really, really revealing the inner veneers? Is he taking the veneer down? Is he revealing the inner shadows of the things that have happened to him and using them in a way that is really pushing society in the way that it pretty much organically is happening? If you take social media, propaganda, like very, very like robust corporate greed out of it, if you take that out, society for the most part is veering to, like a progressive sort of area. Women have more rights, LGBTQ people are more accepted, gender roles are changing, women are working outside of the home, like with technology and social, the world is moving towards a more progressive outlook on a lot of things. Those patriarchal roles are still there, So I think that is highly connected. I just think that when we look at Russell Brand, I don't think we need to vilify the guy. I think that we need to vilify the behavior, the behavior that has been passed down from fathers to their sons, grandfathers to fathers, fathers to their sons of, just keep it all in, keep it all in. Don't let it out. And, for example, I look at the extreme MAGA movement, and somehow I do sort of link Russell Brand up with MAGA and Elon Musk and Joe Rogan and Ben Shapiro and all that stuff to a certain extent. What's his name? The other one. Ugh, God, I can't even remember. But that this new age pseudo-intellectual men's rights almost activist podcast type person, if you are not taking a stance forthright, downright against things like sexism, fascism, racism, if you are not a part of this conversation of taking corporate greed away, and bringing more power to just the everyday person, not having the middle class completely disappear, if you're crunching on those little people while saying, hey, I'm crunching on you, but really this is for your benefit, you're part of the problem. You're not part of the solution. I don't know if I'm verbalizing this very well, but essentially what I'm trying to say is Russell Brand is not the victim. The culture is the victim. The culture of us, continuing to cheer on these tropes of toxic masculinity, of sexism, of objectification of women, of misogyny, of pitting women up against each other, of having these really, really terrible political voices out there who are literally committing crimes, who are corrupt, who are taking bribery, who are involved in, terrible SEXX trafficking type ring things. Not saying that that's Russell Brand, but I'm talking about the bigger world here. Just that idea of that corrupt politician or, CEO of a company who's making millions and billions, but that power, that money is more important than everything else, everybody else, other values, objectifying women and using them as objects, as a nice distraction so that you don't have to think about your childhood trauma. Those things in society, they need to be eliminated. There's only one way that we eliminate them, and it's by calling out people in power when that happens. The people in power, they're still human beings. They're just like everyday human beings like me and you. And me and you, when we have problems, with our bodies, we go to the hospital. When you have problems with your mind, you go to a therapist. You go to a church leader. You go to your priest. You go to your minister. You go to your faith leader. Hopefully, they're not a crazy fascist. But you get what I'm saying. It's like, I feel like basically this penetrates to a larger question that men in general, we need you back at the table, functional and healthy. It's like, go see your priest, go see your minister, go see a therapist, go see a Reiki healer, go see a life coach, whatever it needs to be. But yeah, men dropping the torch a little bit. Women are too, because we are allowing that. We are not calling them out. Guys, I mean, some of them are. Look at Bob Menendez. His wife asked him to resign. So maybe there are some out there who will step up to the plate. But it's hard. It's hard to sometimes go against the grain by doing what's right. Sometimes it's hard to admit that you've done wrong.